Hello out there, all you wonderful people. This is Andre, the Game Idea Guy. Thank you once again for lending me your time and your ear listening to another Gamer's Thoughts discussion. And soon I'm going to be talking about representation in gaming. Now, I'm pretty sure I've talked about this in some aspect before, where I was more so on the side of, hey, I don't want representation just for the sake of representation in gaming. And I still do feel that way for the most part, but I don't think I really thoroughly explained any of the nuance that I had on that position. And I'm pretty sure also that the discussion is a few years old at this point. So, here's what I want to say about that now. Again, I'm not one for throwing a character in just to meet some quota. I don't think that that's genuine to what anybody would do. And then there are also some circumstances where particular types of character representation just don't actually exist. So I'm okay in those situations for those particular types of characters or those particular types of people not being represented in those situations. Take The Witcher 3, for instance. I'm okay with there not being really any black people in that game. One, because of where it is supposedly based, around the time frame it's based, there wouldn't have been a large number of black people in that area, if any at all. So to me, that's not a problem. But just like if you were to take the flip side of that and go to, say, something like Resident Evil 5, it's based in Africa. So you're not going to see a whole lot of white or Hispanic people running around that have been zombified. So it makes sense that you wouldn't see a lot of them. Even though the main protagonist is a white dude, but still, he's there investigating, so it makes some sense. So in those situations, I don't mind a lack or an abundance of representation. It just depends on if the situation particularly calls for it. Now, if you're in a futuristic setting where people have supposedly migrated and blended in almost every place, then yeah, you need to have a lot of different representation. If you're going to do something where people are traveling to the stars and such and moving about like that, again, you're going to need a lot of different types of representation across the board, because it would make sense. It would at least suitably make sense that you'd have a wide range of representation. Again, it's not a thing where I think it has to be forced. It just depends on if the situation makes sense for it. In a fantasy world where you're basically doing whatever you want, you can have all types of representation based upon different things. You can come up with a multitude of different reasons for there to be a particular type of representation of a character, whether it be race, gender, sexuality, whatever. You can do that. So, I guess it's me thinking about it, because I didn't listen to it recently, but I do remember me having a particular stance, and I don't think people, if anybody was paying attention to that, would have been listening to the nuance in it. And for this, I'm giving the nuance. I'm not up for forced representation of a character archetype or a particular type of person. I'm not, because some situations just don't call for it. There are other situations where it makes sense, and it doesn't make sense to not have it. But then there are situations where it's like, oh, well, given the time frame and what they're supposed to be showing off, yeah, this does make some sense. Again, it all depends on what you're trying to incorporate in your world and in your story when you're doing it. And I feel the same way when it comes down to anything that's geek culture represented, basically like with comic books, with movies, anime, any of that stuff. I feel the same way about it. Because in general, not everything needs a large abundance of representation. Some things make sense, some things it doesn't really matter. And at that point, I look toward whether or not it's a good story, if the characters are well developed, if the message of the story can be parsed from what goes on in the events of it, or if there's even a message to the story in the first place. Those are the things I look toward first. So if they, hey, because I'm a black dude, hey, if there's a black character in there that takes the main role and they do a kick-ass job, cool. In most fantasy games, if I have the option, I'm going to make myself a black character because that's how I put myself in the game. Some games don't allow for that. Doesn't make them bad games. I enjoy them for what they are because if they have a particular character and story narrative that they're trying to push forward, then I want to see what that is. But not every game needs to have that option. Some games are good with it. Some games are good without it. I think this is just coming up to me because I've seen so many people throw hissy fits and be angry and get mad at people over fictional worlds because they lack the representation that they want in them. And in those situations, the only thing you can tell this person to do is create their own. And there are some people that do, and there are some people that don't, and then they just complain for the lack thereof. And I don't think that that's fair to the authors. I don't think that's fair to the writers. I don't think that's fair to the people creating the worlds, coming up with the concepts and defining these different characters and their attitudes. That isn't fair. It's not fair to them because maybe they did the world the way they saw it, how they wanted it to be, how they could incorporate themselves into it. And someone's telling them to change their story to fit themselves into another person's story and another person's idea. Again, that's not fair to that person. At least that's how I look at it. That's what I see. I don't think there's too many people that would, on a logical sense, disagree. Hell, I don't even think there's too many people that would emotionally disagree when you look at it from both angles. But I do know that there are a lot of people who won't stop to think about it. They'll just react. They'll just get agitated and angry. And that's not necessary. Just like I don't want to see damn near every zombie apocalypse type game be represented by the lead protagonist being a white dude with short hair, a beard, and dark brown eyes. But that happens a lot. It happens often. The only thing I could say to that, the only thing I could do for that is come up with my own. And I don't get mad at the fact that there are other games that do it. I just end up, if I don't see anything interesting in the game outside of that protagonist character that is pretty generic in my own eyes, then I don't worry about it. I move on to the next thing. And I say that because I know there's going to be somebody, well, then maybe you just don't like white characters. Some of my favorite game franchises have white characters leading them. So that's not the problem. Problem gets to be that there's just an overuse of a certain character archetype. And yeah, I do understand that. But I'm not going to get mad at the people that made the game because of overuse of what has worked for them for a long time. Hey, it's worked. Let's move on to doing something different if we can. If not, get with people that are doing something different or support those that are doing something different as long as it's of quality. Again, there's no need to chide or get mad or take your anger out on the people creating the games, creating the works. At least as far as character representation goes. Hell, if you want to get mad about, hey, this game doesn't play all that great, or there's all these glitches, well, I'd say talk to the producers at that point, because generally I don't think there are very many development teams that want to put out a bad product, but they're usually forced to, depending on circumstances based upon time, which is something I also had to get used to thinking about. Like, they may not have the time to do what they want with the games, but that's a separate subject I've already talked a bunch about. I just think that maybe in the future, considering things in the long term, we take our time and not get mad at the people creating the games or creating the stories, because they're doing what they can with what they have, with the imaginations that they have, and we don't have to treat them like crap for it. So I guess that's the whole point. If you don't see representation that you like, why don't you work on creating the representation yourself and make something that's good and interesting that people would be drawn to? If we work on it from that angle, one, there'll be a lot more creatives out there doing what they would like to do, and two, the representation will naturally find itself out there in the industry. And there'll be more voices, more minds, more stories to be shared, and less arguing and fighting over, hey, there's not this one Asian female character in this game that I think should be there, or hey, there should be this Hispanic trans person in this game, or hey, there should be this black dwarf character in this game. You can do those things on your own and have that representation. I think that works itself out for the better. Because hey, the people with those perspectives, with those mindsets, with those life experiences can add that to the character. And on top of that, with that being added to the character, others can see it and then they can learn from it, and they can develop their characters accordingly. Not necessarily meaning that all the characters are going to be the same, but hey, now they have a better insight on how these types of characters behave and perform, or how these types of people deal with certain situations, how these different cultures act and how they view the world. That in and of itself is a lot better than arguing and fighting and fussing and cussing everybody out because, hey, you didn't make a representation of me and I don't like it. That's what my message is today. So thank you guys very much for listening again. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me. And until the next time, enjoy your games and peace out, everybody.